Hey, here we go with part number 5. So, as you can tell, I've had a bit of a tidy up and a clean up around here. I like to start the stage with a nice clear bench. Everything's gone, tidied up all the tools, put everything away. Basically a clean slate. Wanted the clean bench as well because the motor's all nice and clean and shiny now. Don't want to get any of the oil and grease back on there that I can avoid. So, yeah, here we go. By the end of this episode, I'll be having this thing completely back together and up and running. That's the goal. Might take a few little edits and a few days work here and there, but yeah, I'm going to start putting things back on now. So, end of the last episode, we finished up all our painting. I'm not sure if I pointed out that I'd made all these new gaskets. It took me quite a while. It was one of those rainy day jobs. Cut new gaskets for basically everywhere that I could. Everywhere that needed a gasket, they had a gasket before, pulled it out, made a new one under the oil filler and everything. So, first thing I've already checked before I start the reassembly is to make sure that I've still got spark, that there's a little bit of oil back in those points again, probably just residual stuff that will run down. But I've given it a turn over by hand, and I can still see a really good spark in that spark plug. So I'm just going to start putting bits and pieces back onto this now, and whether I do much talking along the way or whether I just get on with it and we see you at the end when I'm ready to pull the rope and start her up. Hope you enjoy it. One thing worth mentioning is that I've got the right tools now. This big green toolbox over here, thanks Dad, borrowed from your shed. So I'm on the right track with using the right tools for the right jobs now. These are all Whitworth sockets, so Dad's got a good collection there. Yeah, so. Feels like the right torque setting to me. I'm going to lock wire this thing. That'll be fun. Alright, so I've got the lock wire in there, those 4 bolts to start with. I'm going to be putting the gasket on first before I start mucking around with the gears. I think trying to get it on afterwards could be a bit more awkward, so giving these gears a little bit of a wipe down. I haven't got the new oil for the gearbox just yet. I've got the new engine oil, but I didn't have the money at the time to get the gearbox oil as well, so that can wait. I won't be starting it up without the gearbox oil. It's going to be a week. What you're seeing now is just the start of this process. And I only get to spend an hour or 2 a day doing this, not full on, so what turns into a 20-minute, maybe half an hour video for you guys is at least a week of me playing and messing about and trying to figure out what I'm doing, and then forgetting the next day when I come back again. So maybe I do need to get that gasket out of the way before I wreck it. Get the gears in first. Tap that bearing in square. Oh, yeah. Tap the bearing in square. No issue there. It's going in. The last piece, which is this, bolts to the other case, so better do that. So I've taken care of a couple of little things. Got this whole reduction box set up, back on there, bolted on. A couple of issues along the way, had to take it off after I got it on, because this section in here, it wasn't really obvious at the time until I went back and looked over the photos. It can actually fit in and bolt in either way around, but when I put this gear on, there was a lot of rubbing metal to metal between the gear and the inner fitting there. So what I found was that it's just out by just a millimetre, half a millimetre, the way that bearing fits in. So I had to take the whole outer case. A whole outer case had to come back off to undo the bolts from the inside of this, turn it around the other way and put it back in again. So that's all back in now anyway, and the clutch is fitted back on again, so this allows that to spin free on the shaft, and then once it's in, obviously it locks up and then transfers the drive from the engine. Worked out just from some marks on the shaft when I turned the motor over, or the engine over, it's about a 25:1 gear ratio reduction. So came around this side and I've got the little muffler fitted back on, new gasket in there. Reused the old nuts and washers. Just trying to source new stuff with the right thread is pretty difficult. I had to reuse all the old little, you can see those, they're bolts that have had a screw head ground into them sometime in the past, but I had to reuse all of those. I went to the engineering shop to get new ones, and because of them being Whitworth and funny threads, they were all a special order, which could have taken a while, and retapping or drilling and tapping out to metric just wasn't an option because of the size, and having to get the heads to fit inside those little sockets in the casing there. The bigger bolt head wouldn't have fitted back inside there. So right around here on the carburetor, I've got this back on, the governor linkage is back in, that stubborn little screw that I had issues getting undone is back in, and now if we pull up and down by the spring, we've got full movement there from, I think that's idle back there, wide open throttle there. So I've still got to set and tighten things up on the shaft. This is still loose in here. By doing it in this order and having that gearbox on, I've sort of created a little bit of an issue with being able to get to the other side of that that nut in there. But I'm sure I can slide a ring spinner in there somehow, figure out how to hold that to do it up from the other end. So that's progress so far. I seem to just keep winding it over now and then just to make sure that there's still spark. That's why the spark plug's still sitting outside the head. Just thought we'd add this in and carry on with the next bit. So we're back at it for another go today. As you can see, I've made a little bit of progress here. Got the fuel tank and the straps back on. Everything's back on here. There's one bit of advice I could give anyone who's looking for advice on doing something like this. Don't put the gearbox back on first. It's just created me a whole lot of problems. As I showed you earlier, getting access in behind here for the carburetor and stuff was an absolute nightmare. Especially when it came to refitting the fuel line. I had the carburetor on there, went to get the fuel line in, and I just had absolutely no gap to get a spanner onto that nut. So carburetor came back off to do that. Refitted the carb again. As you know, when I first got this, I didn't run it, didn't put any fuel in it. So when I had it all hooked back up and threw some fuel in the tank, I've got a fuel leak. Initially I had a fuel leak through here because I didn't quite have that squeezed in tight. That was a bit of a nightmare, so that all came back off to retighten that. Then when I did, got that to stop leaking, I've got a leak in the fuel line itself up here, so I'm going to have to get a whole new fuel line made, I think. I'll have a little play around with this today, but I don't think there's any way that I can seal it and stop that leak. Another little trick I'm going to show you is the fuel tap itself. Inside this fuel tap on the slide, there's cork that runs in there. The corks dry out over time, especially this had been sitting around, the cork was all dry and starting to crumble. Little trick, I did a little search online, found a little video of what to do with these, involving replacing the cork with rubber O-rings. So the video that I saw showed taking this apart, taking the whole plunger out, and replacing the entire section with a stack of 4 O-rings. Now these O-rings are a little bit special. They're a 106 O-ring, an imperial O-ring. I tried with a metric O-ring around about the same size that I thought would work, and it just didn't. So these imperial O-rings are 106. Are just the right size. Now I tried with the initial stack of 4 and it worked really well. It was all sealing, no leaks. but once I run it a few times, the fuel had swollen the O-rings and it was jamming up. So I got it back out, and what I've done now, and I'm finding is working, is that I've got an O-ring at one end, 3 of the original sections of cork, there were 5 in there, so I've got 3 sections of cork and then an O-ring at the other end. So hopefully when I try this again, I won't have the same problem. The O-rings were just rolling against each other and binding up inside there. So there's a little tip. So yeah, that's sliding well now. I am having issues with the little screw, the little retainer screw in the bottom there. The thread's a little bit out, so I'm going to have a play around and tap and maybe put in a slightly larger screw into there to retain that. The other issue I had was the little needle, the float in the bottom of the carburetor. Even though I'd cleaned it, I couldn't figure out how to get the whole entire inside slide out of the carburetor. I've now found the diagrams of that, and as much as I don't want to, I've got to pull the butterfly out. Looks like it's going to be really tricky when it comes to putting that back in, but I've got to take that out to be able to slide the entire assembly up. That way I can move. There's a little retainer in there that holds the needle in for the float. I've got to get that out and give it a really good clean, because it's still not seating properly, and I was just having flooding issues in the car. So yeah, I have tried to start this, and I did have it running for a few seconds, or yeah, maybe 10-20 seconds, but there was all sorts of fuel leaks, so I didn't film that. So yeah, I've had some problems. I'm going to try and overcome those today and have another go at it later on. If I can get it to start up, then I'll film it running. Cool. I'm going to clean this bench off. As you can see, I've got a bit of a collection of tools. Move the motor out of the way and get into stripping this car right down properly. So the problem I've got is the little needle is inside here. Check you can see that. Don't know how good the focus is, but the little needle up under there, and these push up and down by the float to stop that from draining. So I'm going to take that right out if I can. I've got to slide this, from what I understand, goes all the way up and comes out through the top, but to get that out, the whole butterfly for the throttle has to come off. Got everything about as clean as I can with what I've got. Given everything a good soak and a spray, and blow out with some compressed air and wipe over with rags. Gave the end of that needle just a little bit of a wet sand. I don't want to get too carried away and end up misshaping it. So I've just given that just to get rid of. There was a little ridge. I've just polished it up anyway, so we're going to chuck that back together, start reassembling this thing, and yeah, hope it works. So I've done a little bit off camera. I thought I'd avoid you having to listen to my swearing and cursing, trying to get that little screw back down through the butterfly on the throttle there, so that's all back in. Not too many more bits to go. Just got a couple of little tiny nuts and bolts here and there, and then yeah, we'll be back in business hopefully. Everything's moving how it should. That's good news. Good news. Fully reassembled carburetor now. Another thing I noticed when I had it apart was the top part here was a little bit odd looking, so I just ran it over a honing stone and found that there was some really high spots at the end. So whether it's going to make a difference or not, but I've honed that down just to a bit more of a flatter surface. I just figured if they were high on the end, I might not have been getting a good seal even with a new gasket in there, so I've just flattened that right off, and hopefully that'll seal up a bit better. Just takes away another potential problem. Yeah, I think that float's functioning well now. I've had it up this way and can blow through it. As soon as I turn it upside down, that should be meaning that the float's effectively pushing the needle, and I can't blow through it anymore. So I know that's sealing. So as long as the fuel filling up does the job and lifts the float, which it was, last time, the float's not rattling, and when I've taken it out, the float isn't full of fuel, so I know the float's still good, not leaking. Alright, so next thing I'm going to do, I think, is head down the road to a shop that makes, or that I think makes, fuel lines, and see if I can't get a new one of these made up, or see if they can do something, maybe even just taking the ends off this and replacing the hose part in between. I don't really want to be changing banjo fittings and fittings on the ends here, but if I have to, just gotta do what I gotta do, I suppose. I like this braided looking hose in here, so we'll see what we can come up with anyway. See you when I get back. Okay, so we had a minor setback with the fuel line here. Went to the automotive place that I thought in town still made up fuel lines and brake lines and stuff, but they don't do it anymore, and their option was to send this away to have a replica, or have it remade. I didn't really want to go with that option. It was going to take too long for them to send it away, so what I've bought instead is from them a length of fuel hose tube and some hose clamps. So what I've got to do is undo these crimps off the end somehow. It's going to be a one-way trip, unfortunately. Hacksaw or grind or do something to cut these crimps off, and hopefully there'll be a hose tail inside there, inside this fitting and inside this hose fitting as well, that I can then push the new fuel line onto, cut to length, and secure with hose clamps. So I've tried bending this backwards and forwards, and I can see that it only leaks, well, it leaks the most when it's flexed open, so there must be a crack on the internal under this wire braiding. So yeah, I'm going to hook into that now, try and get rid of these as carefully as I can without damaging the tail inside. So it looks like this was definitely a good option, and in a roundabout way a blessing in disguise. When I cut these crimps, I just ran the grinder down there and twisted them open with a screwdriver to release them. This end basically just fell off in my hand. The rubber around the inside, this is the one from that end there, was that perished. Like the rubber just broke away inside the braiding. There was nothing holding it. So chances are there may have even, that was ready to start leaking as well. Up at the top end, this is the one that had the initial leak that made me decide to do this step. Yeah, that's the same, it's come away as well, just the inside rubber inside the inside this, just gone. So I got the two fittings out and new piece of fuel line. We'll put this back together with some hose clamps and have a new fuel line. Won't be braided, won't look as cool as this, but never mind. I think it's a safe option, and definitely a better option, because I don't want to spill fuel everywhere and make a big mess. Cool, do that now. Just like magic, I've got a new fuel line made. Worked out pretty good. As long as I make sure I get this on the right way around, so that the hose clamp there doesn't interfere with the throttle when it goes back onto the little block. got to make sure I get it up that way so that this is out towards the gearbox. I've just checked that against the engine, and this one up to the fuel tank. So let's get working on putting this little block back together with all its banjo bolts through here. Got to put that carburetor bolt back in first. Another little trick was that when this was all assembled, there was no way that this bolt could fit up through there once that fuel line's reconnected, so I've got to make sure I at least have the nut and bolt sitting in there. Okay, let's get on with it. Okay, so we've had a bit of a result now. Fuel line's back in, I've got no fuel leak at the top. My fuel tap now pulls in and out freely, on and off. Really good, no leaks, no fuel coming out of there. Did have a small leak from the banjo fitting in here. Tightened that up a little bit, still a small leak there, but when it's running it'll be okay, I think. Carburetor's all back on. I've adjusted the needle valve to get it running at its high revs and dropping back to idle. So yeah, I've had it running, refilled with oil. Obviously I did that before I ran it. I haven't got oil in the gearbox yet, so I'm not going to run it for an extended period of time, but I just want to show you that the motor runs. So we'll lift it down on the ground, probably just outside the door here on the concrete, and I'll spin it up, eh? Alright, here we go. Hope this works and it's not going to call me a liar. That should be at idle there. On, fuel's on. Open that. So there we go. I've got quite a bit of adjustment left on this idle screw. I'm going to back that out to get it to drop its revs down, but this is the result I wanted for this episode, so I hope you've enjoyed watching it, and I know it's been a bit painstaking along the way. Definitely found my fair share of challenges and things I'm going to really learn from and remember for next time. So last thing to finish this engine, put the two little plates back on, and then we'll put this aside and probably move on to one of the frames and some of the implements for the next episode. But for now, that's us, and yeah, subscribe so you can see when I put something out next. I'm back at work now, so it'll probably be a little while, week or two maybe, but I'll try something on my days off, and see you next round. Thank you.